Welcome to the GMS Magazine podcast. I am Paco Garcia, your host, and this is a show all about board games, role-playing games, and the people who make them, especially the people who make them, sometimes even the people who play them. I am Paco Garcia, your host, and this is the RPG interview room, the room in which I am lucky enough to get together with some of the best people in the world of role-playing games and ask them a ton of questions. Lovecraftesque did its rounds a little while ago to a huge success by literally applying the formula of getting rid of the problematic content to Lovecraft's work, which I think is a very well worth thing to do. Now, Josh and Becky are back to create Lovecraftesque 2, and I was very curious because I wonder what else did it have to increase or to improve or to expand on Lovecraftesque, because it was such a well-rounded game. And well, I think they did not disappoint in the slightest, I can assure you. Before I continue with the interview though, the usual reminder, please subscribe to our channel. Subscribe because it helps a great deal and it means the world. Trust me, it really does. It's fantastic to have you around. So please say hello and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to be in the podcast, if you want to talk to Chris or myself or both of us, just let us know. podcast@gmsmagazine.com. Get in touch in Twitter or in Facebook, anywhere you like. And I promise that we will pay attention to you. We would love to hear from you. And by all means, do send your comments. Really, they mean a lot. But okay, I'm not gonna ramble anymore. Here we go with Lovecraftesque 2. Becky, Joshua, welcome to the show. We've been coming and going to organize this because life is super hectic, but we're actually fairly close. So that helps an awful lot. How are you two doing?
Thank you. Yeah.
Really well. Thank you so much for asking.
Okay, so I'm going to jump straight in because, as I was mentioning before I started the recording process, I have not read Lovecraftesque. I have heard some things. I have seen some people really pissed off about the game. I also hasten to add, I have seen the right sort of people pissed off with the game. So that's, Lovecraftesque 1, Assholes 0, which is very good. But tell me a little bit, before going into what the game is all about, tell me a little bit about the two of you. What do you do with the game? How do you work together? Who are you, basically?
Oh, right. That's a really big question.
Yes.
I will. Shall I answer that one, Josh, and then you can add in
Yeah.
the bits that are missing, and then we'll swap for the next question, maybe. So, Josh and I are the co-founders of Black Armada Games. We're also a writing partnership. We also live together and have 2 children together. And so we live in a house which is constantly gaming, constantly talking about gaming, constantly thinking about gaming. And I think that has been really beneficial to both of us in creating a really fertile space to develop our design practice, because it's something that we're always immersed in, and we're always talking about it. And we've been doing this. We've been game designing now together. If we go all the way back to when we started designing LARPs together, I think it's probably over 20 years now, Josh.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that your shocked face?
22 years, I'd say.
22 years of designing games together. And I think our process is, I think that we really push each other quite hard, actually. And I've said in interviews before, and I will say it in this one, that I don't need an inner critic, and I don't really have an inner critic because Josh does all that heavy lifting. And the same is absolutely true, vice versa. And it's a bit of a joke in our house that when one of us comes up with a game idea and we slide it across the table to the other, the other person will automatically start saying, right, okay, so, but hang on a minute, you should structure this better, and this bit of mechanic doesn't really work. Even before you get to the whole, this is a wonderful idea, darling, you've done such a brilliant job, you must have worked really hard on this. We're like, no, bam, straight into what you could improve about it. And so, but I think that has kind of pushed us both to be, well, as good as we can be. That's fair, Josh?
Yeah, I think so. And I would add that as well as designing together, of course, we play a lot together. And there's one of the great things about having a partner who is also a gamer. You can, you get to do more role playing. That's pretty great.
Oh, yeah.
And then after the session's finished and everyone else has gone home, you've got the opportunity to really, like analyze the whole thing to death, basically. So we spend a lot of time kind of talking about, what worked, what did we like about this game or that game, what would we change. So we've got a really finely tuned sense of what we like and what we think is good design.
You mentioned earlier, Becky, that you were doing LARP design 22 years ago. Was that at the same time that you were doing tabletop design as well, or did you two take that step later? How did that happen?
I think it's a bit of a tricky one in some ways, because it depends on what you count as design. And I know that we have a very broad church about what people count as design these days, but do you count as design writing homebrew scenarios for a Dungeons and Dragons campaign when you're 11? Or is it coming up wholesale with completely new mechanics and a game from whole cloth? So I think for me, I was most of my design came in at the LARP stage about 22 years ago. Prior to that, I hadn't really done very much. But that the LARPs tended to have quite a lot of mechanics in them, even for a LARP. So for me, I sort of segued into tabletop design probably a couple of years before Lovecraftesque came out. I had a game published by Pelgrane Press.
Nice.
In the Seven Wonders anthology called When the Dark Is Gone. And that was probably what I would consider to be my first tabletop design, although I've been playing tabletop games since I was 11. What about you, Josh?
I think you are underestimating when you started, actually.
Really?
So we, when we were at university together and in the years immediately following, we had a very active and I would say large group of friends who would go on holiday together to like a little set of cottages somewhere in the countryside for a week and just game the whole week, right? And when we did that, we would nearly always be running homebrew stuff with some system we've written ourselves. And I remember writing a game with you, Becky, that was not a LARP. I mean, it might have been only barely a tabletop in terms of having quite light mechanics. Yeah, you see. I, for one, was spending a lot of time doing tabletop design there, and that was like writing a system, even like from whole cloth for a scenario at that stage. So I guess that's most of the 20 years accounted for.
Well, how did that Pelgrane collaboration came up? Because I know that they are extremely open and really welcoming of new writers, but I also know that they get an awful lot of offers. So how did that happen?
I'm probably ashamed to admit that I think it was a friend of a friend, really, that they approached me, sort of. I had read and played Fiasco by Jason Morningstar. This is how this bit starts. I had read and played Fiasco by Jason Morningstar, and there were things that I liked about it, and there were things that I wasn't sure about. No, that's not true. It wasn't that I wasn't sure. It was that the game didn't do what I wanted it to do, and I wasn't sure any prepless game could do what I wanted to do. And what I mean by this, I like my games to have some emotional bite. I want to really feel my character and then really inhabit my character and feel that their actions are really meaningful to me personally and that sort of thing. And I sort of felt, it's prepless gaming. It's all very cool, but it feels a bit gonzo. Feels a bit wild. I don't feel that attached to my character, and maybe that's just not possible if I haven't spent 10 sessions building up some sort of huge set of relationships with the other people in the party and all that sort of thing. So it was really, I was sort of saying to myself, I wonder if you could get a deep emotional experience from a prepless one shot. And so I wrote the game called When the Dark Is Gone, which was purely designed to do just that. I remember showing it to Josh and him saying that'll never work, which obviously spurred me to make sure it damn well did. And I play tested it a couple of times, and I play tested it with a really close friend of mine who happened to be a close friend of somebody's at Pelgrane. And I think there used to be a London design group called the Games Kitchen or something like that.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah,
I remember
yeah.
them. Yes.
I never went to it because I think that we had moved up to Derbyshire after it started, so I never got to go to any of them, which was a real shame because it sounded like exactly my jam. And the Games Kitchen was doing a session on designing for emotional bite in games, and my friend happened to mention my game, and that's how it came up. And then I was put in touch with somebody. So
that is
that's very cool.
That's quite amazing. And Josh, how about you? When did you design when did you start to design your first games?
Well, I like Becky. I would say it depends what you count. I mean, I think I was designing almost as long as I've been role playing, because as soon as I picked up the Dungeons and Dragons Red Box when I was 10, I was like, I want to change things about this. I have my own ideas about systems, and I want to reskin it. And so I was messing around with that stuff from day one, really. And again, like Becky, when we got to university, we did a lot of LARP design and sort of what we would have called at the time homebrews for like friends to play. But designing to publish, that happened around 2012 when I wrote, I think, my first game, Disaster Strike, a disaster movie simulator that I wrote. And again, like, it was kind of hot on the heels of playing Fiasco for the first time, which is a real sort of inspiration to us in terms of what a game can be. And yeah, it wasn't long after that we started work on Lovecraftesque. So it was a pretty rapid launch.
Okay, so when did this? And please don't get this wrong, okay? Because when this love affair with Lovecraft kind of began, it sounds horrible. It sounded a lot better in my head because then. But when did you start to like Lovecraft stuff and cosmic horror? Because obviously you are into it.
So I think it's very boring, but I'm going to have to say university again. I've been reading for my whole life. I've always read science fiction, fantasy, horror. Round about the time I ended up at university, we were both members of the University Role Playing Society, which was incredibly active as role playing societies go. So it had, it would run, I think at that point, 3 to 4 events a week. You would on average get between 20 to 40 people per event. You could get as many as 60 people sometimes turning up at events. So it was an incredibly active place, and it was a very fertile place. There was a lot of people designing games, homebrew, LARP, that sort of thing, and a lot of people were, obviously playing games, reading all sorts of things. And I think I picked it up there that some of my friends were reading H.P. Lovecraft at that time, so I started reading it. I think at the time I was reading it with a very immature eye as to some of the problems in the work, and I gained a better understanding of that later. But that's kind of the first time that I became interested in cosmic horror, as opposed to the sort of horror I'd probably been reading previously, which would have been things like James Herbert's The Rats and Dean Koontz and people like that.
Okay. How about you, Josh?
Yeah, I think for me it was a lot later. I was part of what I call the Secret Treasury Role-Playing Society when I worked in the UK Civil Service. So as a group of civil servants who would play role-playing games after hours in government offices.
Wait. Stop. Civil servants playing role-playing games. I thought you lot were meant to be boring.
Well, we like to keep it secret. That's the whole point. You have to keep these things below the radar, otherwise
everybody would want to be a civil servant. It's fun.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the first game of first Lovecraftian game I played was probably there. I was playing in a Call of Cthulhu game and I really liked the vibe. It's not particularly Lovecraft, I don't think, but the kind of the unknowable horror and the slow burn investigation into that was really appealed to me. And in fact, the next game I can think of that I really got into that was like that was running a game of Dark Heresy, the Warhammer 40k investigation game, which I view as being essentially a kind of cosmic horror game. You know, it's all about digging into terrible, evil, unknowable forces that threaten mankind, and equally problematic, of course. But I ran that game with Becky and 3 other friends who had never read or played any Warhammer before. So I essentially ran it as this kind of fully unknowable, because they didn't know what it was they were dealing with, describing the aliens and the monsters as if from somebody who'd never encountered them before. And yeah, had a great time doing it.
I can imagine, because that sounds like a really out there way of getting introduced into cosmic horror, because I don't think that's what anyone would be expecting, wouldn't it? I mean, everybody think about Warhammer, and everybody thinks about this Space Marine and big armors and let's kill this thing and okay, it's bad, and little else. So getting in that way, it must have been quite an experience, I can imagine. So Lovecraftesque, we established that you like to find out what's missing in a game, what do you need the game to do, and create it. And I can imagine Lovecraftesque must have started in a similar way, because there are plenty of Cthulhian kind of role-playing games out there, and yet you wanted to do Lovecraftesque. What did you want to bring to the cosmic horror, to the Lovecraft cosmic horror universe that other games weren't doing at the time?
So I think the prompt for us doing it was Becky picking up Graham Walmsley's Stealing Cthulhu, which I don't know if you've come across that. You're nodding.
Well, I read it and I gave it a bad review at the time.
Did you?
Yeah,
What?
I did. I did for one reason, and one reason alone. I absolutely loved the content, and I have been referencing that book time and time again. I think is genius. But as a dyslexic, the fact that at least the edition that I have uses footnotes to actually finish paragraphs and give completely pieces of information, it's a freaking nightmare to read, because you're not just doing this, you're doing this as well. So it's incredibly difficult to read for me. So it was a torture, that I was loving the content so much, and yet having it so inaccessible that from the accessibility point of view alone, I couldn't give it a good review. If that book was rearranged to have a more linear reading and truly use footnotes for what footnotes should be, which is reference to something very short that cannot, for some reason, shouldn't go onto the text, then that book would read a lot better. That's why I gave it a bad review. But the content, I thought that book it's a masterpiece. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, really interesting.
Well, at any rate, the book, I mean, Becky usually tells the story, but it's my turn. I'm going to tell the story. In effect, we looked at it and found this is a blueprint for an indie, like a story game style Lovecraftian game, because it plots out the tone, the beats, the story beats, and kind of the structure and the tips and tricks for everything you need to make a really good cosmic horror game or scenario. And in fact, what we did was step away from that and say, well, how, if you took these ideas and turned them into game mechanics, what would you end up with? So I think that's one thing. But actually, there was a lot more to it than that. I think there were two or three big things that we wanted to do with Lovecraftesque, which I think we managed to carry off. One of which is to write stories that really feel like a Lovecraft story, in that they are about one person, a single character who is not particularly skillful or well equipped, just stumbling into a frightening situation, stumbling on cosmic evil and being plunged into horror, and ultimately having terrible things happen to them, which is completely counter to the experience of most role-playing games, which are obviously more designed around kind of group investigation and successful taking down of the horror. We wanted an indie style horror that everyone could discover at the table, rather than having one GM who sat there knowing all the answers and dishing out the clues. And we wanted to tackle the problematic aspects of Lovecraft, the racism and the mental health ableism, which we saw in that. And so those were sort of the things we added on top of that formula of Graham's.
How did you start the process of designing the game? And the reason I ask this is because it is very easy for us to know a lot of games about Lovecraft and being influenced by those games. I mean, it's hard to take the bias away. So how did you start the process of actually picking on those problematic elements and taking them out without taking out the horrific aspect of it? Because even though, yeah, most Cthulhu games are quite ableist when it's about mental health, I don't feel they treat mental health appropriately. How do you go about resolving that without being biased by those games?
Shall I talk about? I'll talk about the mental health aspect in particular, because I think more people wiser than me have written better about the racism. But for me, the mental health aspect was really interesting. What we did was that we went and back through, and I reread every single one of Lovecraft's stories, and so did Josh. And we looked at how he treated mental health in his stories with quite an almost like scholarly lens. And we learned some really interesting things when we did that, which formed the basis of the essay and the piece that we wrote. And the first thing that we found is that it is actually incredibly rare in a Lovecraft story written by Lovecraft for somebody to see a horror, have their mind break, and just go mad. That almost never happens. What he actually does is some very different things. So firstly, he'll say things like the protagonist enters the town and mad old Hetty comes and warns the protagonist that there is some dark goings on up at the tower. And of course, the reality is that other people in the town are calling Hetty mad. Lovecraft is almost bait and switching the reader by just dismissing Hetty as mad, when of course the reality is that Hetty isn't mad. Hetty is telling the truth. And it's just almost a way, he often uses it as a sort of a storytelling device to sort of give a bit of a nod and a wink to say, oh, well, we're going to pretend there's nothing bad going on, but we all know there is really. So he often uses it in that way. He occasionally uses it as a cipher for unreliable, but not as often, I think, as people think. So one of the first pieces of advice that we gave when people playing the game was just don't use mental health as a cipher for unreliability. There are plenty of other things that you can use to obfuscate the horror. Maybe it was dark. Maybe somebody's eyesight was bad. Maybe they were terrified and they weren't thinking straight, in a temporary state of fear. There's a lot of different ways that you can make a witness unreliable without going back on that tired old trope. We recommend that you don't have people just suddenly have their sanity supposedly snap when they see Cthulhu, because actually that doesn't really happen in the books. And so it was unusual to us, because we were expecting to get into the stories and to see in the stories as much terrible mental health stuff as there is terrible racism. Because there really is some very bad racism in his stories. But actually, when we got in there, the mental health stuff was nowhere near as bad. nowhere near as bad as what we were expecting. He often describes people behaving in a way which is actually very clearly a post-traumatic stress disorder response. And he doesn't call it madness necessarily. He just describes what they do in a way which is very clearly somebody having trouble processing things. But it's this idea that somebody sees Cthulhu and their sanity suddenly snaps. That trope hasn't really come from his work. That has come from what role-playing games have layered on top with insanity mechanics. When they started to mechanize insanity, they brought in this whole extra layer. And of course, part of what we wanted to do with Lovecraftesque was get back to the stories, a single witness seeing something horrible, not a pulpy party game. And so it was very easy for us to say, well, because we want to be rooted in the stories in this aspect, we don't need to engage with insanity mechanics. They don't help us. They don't tell the story we want to tell in this situation. So we will just leave that behind. Do you have anything to add to Josh?
Yeah, so I think, like, mechanically though, we do have something which sort of touches on the mental health side, and that is rationalization. Because the thing that we see in those stories is rationalization, and the character, the witness as we call them, explaining to themselves why it's actually fine. You know, the noises that I can hear behind the walls are perfectly normal. It's probably just the wind. There's always a rational explanation. And so after every scene in Lovecraftesque, you will have encountered some sort of strange clue, which will get stranger and stranger as the game goes on. And after every scene, the main character will sit down and just explain to themselves why everything is fine and normal. And at the beginning of the game, this is quite easy. And as the game goes on, the rationalizations become more and more strained until eventually there is no denying what's happening to them. And that has the same feeling, I think, as those sanity mechanics of a character who is trying harder and harder to convince themselves that everything is all right until they can't anymore.
And then what happens?
And then they are plunged into the darkness at the end of the story, and they encounter the horror, and we find out what happens to them. They will be able to react to it in a rational way, the same way that most of H.P. Lovecraft's protagonists do. Many of them are, quite frankly, coldly rational. They will report back exactly what's happened in clinical detail. Perhaps they will scream in terror. Probably they will try to run away. And maybe they'll get out, or maybe they'll end up a victim of the horror themselves. And the Lovecraftesque is designed to tell stories with a bleak ending. It's very rare for the good guys to win.
Which is fair enough. But the reason why I asked, and what happens then, is because one of the things that I personally dislike of most Cthulhu-based games is how the erosion of sanity leads to character demise too often in a very, very untimely way that is not really fun. It just isn't fun at all. Not just the fact that it does so by adding layers of mental health pathologies that are a bit, when, to be perfectly honest, I've always felt that that kind of pathologies should be a superpower. I mean, if anything, this is what's happening to you to help you cope with what you cannot understand. How can that possibly be bad for you? You know what I mean? I think these games are missing the chance of actually punching up rather than punching down on mental health issues. And that's why I was asking, what happens once you cannot rationalize that? How are you going to lose your character in the middle of the game? Are you going to have a possibility to continue using that character until the end of the game? How does that fit with the narrative?
So the structure of the game, you are actually prevented from introducing clues which would make it really obvious that something supernatural is going on at the start of the game. And over the course of the game, that protection is gradually peeled back. But it's only at the end where you get something that is undeniably supernatural. And that's what happens in an H.P. Lovecraft story. And it means that the point where the character is finally unable to deny what's happening to them is also the point at which it's too late. they can't run away. They can't go home. They're already on the slippery slope that's leading to the final confrontation with the horror, and that's what's going to happen. You get to keep your character, and you get to watch them have their demise at the end. Except in the rare case where the character is swapped out midway through the story, which is an option that's available sometimes. But that you would do that in a as you say, not random, not kind of, oh dear, oh, I rolled slightly too much on my sanity loss, I'm gone, but rather carefully framed and chosen moment where something bad happens to the character and somebody else comes in and replaces them.
For the biggest dramatic impact. It's probably also worth saying at this point that because the game only has one character, and this is a deliberate design choice, of course, there is only one character, and we can get into later about how you have a game for 2 to 5 people where there's only one playable character. But you will share responsibility for that character. You all take a turn in playing them. So you hold them very lightly. What you're all holding very heavily at the table is the trajectory of the story. Is everything we said about when we read Stealing Cthulhu and the way that Graham breaks down the beats of a Lovecraftesque story. This is a game which is going to take you through every single one of those beats. Okay. So you will experience the story start to finish with the satisfying conclusion, and that's what everybody in the table is colluding in producing together.
Okay, and that's something I wanted to ask you as well, because these kind of narrative games, this is something that I also find really infuriating, is when they tell you about, yeah, you can create all these stories and these are the rules, but at no point, so many of those games give you any clues as to how to organize your story, how to create it. There's no structure, there isn't even a mention of anything like the hero's journey, which is like the bare basics. This is the minimum that you should know. How do you address that in Lovecraftesque?
So at the beginning of the game, there are rules in play which dictate the pacing of the story. So when you first start the game, you'll have a number of different rules in play, and one of them will be no physical attacks on either the main character or any other humans. Mm-hmm. There'll be a rule, as I think Josh mentioned earlier, which is that when you find clues of the horror, they have to be plausibly deniable. They have to be a shadow half seen through a window at midnight in flickering candlelight, something that could easily be explained away using Occam's razor. And these rules are in play for the first, I want to say 5 scenes. Is that right, Josh? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, correct.
Yep. When you've had those 5 scenes, then some of those rules will be eroded and new rules will come in, which will allow you to bring in clues. And there's a lot of guidance in the game text which will help you with this, but clues which are now a step up, something which is still potentially plausibly deniable, but it's going to be a lot harder work. You're going to have to work a lot harder to rationalize that away that you just saw. And maybe NPCs or other characters that you might have been introduced to, they might be able to be subject of attacks, but not you. Mm-hmm. And then you will play, I think it's the maximum of 2 scenes in that space. And then you'll move into a different phase of the game again, which will have its own rules. And so there's, I think, 4 or 5 different phases to the game, each of which has a set of parameters to help you and really guide you in ending up with feeling something, producing a story which feels like it would have come out of one of Lovecraft's unfinished notebooks.
Okay. How to ask this? One character. What? How did that even happen? Because that's really strange. How did that happen? How? Please tell me.
The best horror stories, in my view, are written with one character because it creates that sense of isolation. Mm-hmm. You are left with somebody who doesn't have any help, doesn't have any support, and they are blithely stumbling forward through this terrible discovery that they're going to make. And that's what Lovecraftesque does. Instead of having a group of 2 or 3 other people who you can call on for help if you get into trouble, or a set of skills. You are just this one ordinary person, and the game, because it's one character, the game shares it around, so you take turns to play that main character. In a way, though, that character is not the main character at all. The main character really is the horror. And again, you each get an equal share of that, so you each take turns to be the one to introduce a clue. Your job when you are the narrator for a scene is to come up with a clue and to seed it into some sort of scene for the witness, as we call them, the main character, to discover. And once they've done that, everyone will take a moment, secretly and privately, to write down what they think is really going on. So everybody has a theory as to what the monster is, or what the conspiracy is, or what the terrifying truth that lies behind all this is, and use that to drive your contributions to the game. And so over the course of the game, the clues that the other players are introducing are gradually altering your theory of the horror, so that when it comes around to your turn, you're going to create something that's kind of a cross-pollination of your ideas and their ideas. And that's what the game's about, those kind of two poles, the terrified witness who you all share and get to take part in, and the greater horror which you all get to share and take part in as well.
I really love the sound of that. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit more about the mental health in the game and how you've handled it, because one of the, and I say this in brackets, complaints I've seen from people is that there is a lot of safety measures around in the game and a lot of instructions as to how many pages of how to deal with this, and don't do that if you don't want to, and change this for this other if you feel like it. How do you go about it, and why is it so important for you?
Well, I'll talk about why it was important for us, and then maybe Josh, you want to handle the other part of the question. But I think the reason it was so important to us, and this is the same for Lovecraft's racism, is that we did not want to contribute something to a body of work which at its kernel and at its core had racism and mental health problems. We did not want our game to extend and make those worse. I think we felt really responsible that if we were going to do anything about Lovecraft in an already, let's be fair, quite crowded space, game-wise, that the bare minimum it was on us to do was to put in some really heavy guidance, which anybody is of course free to ignore, although we would rather they didn't. But some really heavy guidance to really shine a spotlight on what is going on with the racism in Lovecraft stories, because I think from a white gaze, the racism in his stories isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's really obvious, like the horror at Red Hook, but sometimes, like with the Shadow over Innsmouth, it's a little less obvious. And so the first thing was, it was really important that our work didn't extend that, didn't make it worse. And that became particularly important to us on the mental health side, when we realized that some of the things that had cropped up in role-playing games in this genre in the past, which were really unhelpful in terms of mental health stigmatism, didn't even come from Lovecraft. And we saw that and we thought, crikey, we've got a real responsibility here to make sure, as far as we can, that we are not making this situation worse, extending it. Like, as far as we can, we're going to try and give you some really strong guidelines and guideposts saying this is where the racism is. So this is a good thing to avoid, and you should try and avoid it. But also that we weren't inadvertently adding a whole extra layer of hurt and pain that didn't even need to be there.
Fair enough indeed.
I would say in all of our games, we take pride in providing really, really good GM guidance, because we think that it is not enough to write a set of mechanics and just say, off you go. Just roll the dice the way we told you to and everything will be fine. We always take the time to talk about what is the expected tone in this game, what are the tricks that you can do to create the kind of drama and story that you want to see in this type of game, and just as much support as possible for the GM to deliver a really good story. Now, of course, in Lovecraftesque, there is no GM. There's just the people around the table. And we've done everything that we can to strip out any mechanics and any setting detail that would lead on a kind of slippery slope way towards the type of ableism and racism that we see in some work in this area. But it's not enough to do that. It's just in the same way that we provide really good guidance for the GM in any of our GM'd games, we're providing good guidance for you as a player to tell the right kind of story here. As Becky says, it is kind of optional. There's, I think, the first edition, the rules of the game in effect are kind of 60 pages long, and you could stop there. You don't have to read the rest of the book. There's the essays in there. There's all of the scenarios that you can use. There's a lot of material you can use to enhance your game. But if you stopped after the first 60 pages and wanted to play the game, you get a great experience out of it. And yeah, that's fine if that's what you want to do. No problem.
I think that's something else I wanted to mention is that the first edition of the game and the second edition comes with packs of scenarios. And part of our approach on racism and mental health is making sure that what is in those scenarios is consistent with the position that we've laid out in our essays.
Okay.
So that the materials you're being given to generate your clues from are not accidentally laced with racism traps.
Okay. How have you gone about making sure that is the case? Have you employed sensitivity consultants? Are you mental health professionals? What measures have you taken to prevent any mistakes happening along the way?
Sensitivity consultants.
Okay.
And just really thoroughly and carefully reading them ourselves, making sure that our writers understand what the philosophy is behind the game. I mean, we're only human. We all have to just do the best that we can. But I think if you read the scenarios, what we have tried to do is all the things that we advocate in our essays, making sure that that there are characters who aren't just white, straight men in every story, and that where those characters are there, they're not going to be stereotyped. They're not just going to be victims, but actually have some sort of active role to play. All those kinds of things. It's simply a case of going through and making sure that is the case, and that we're not replicating the harmful patterns that you see in Lovecraft's work.
And that said, we're doing our absolute best. But if people find stuff in there that we've messed up on, then tell us. We would rather know so that we can get it even better next time.
Makes sense. Makes sense indeed. Okay, so why Lovecraftesque 2? Why a new edition? What is this new edition going to have that the first one doesn't?
Shall I pick that up? So the core of the game remains the same. It is still this indie storytelling game where the horror emerges from your individual contributions. You're still playing a single character. All of the stuff that we've said to you so far, basically, still true. So there's a few things that are new in this. One is a lot more creative support for you at the table, because one of the things we heard about the first edition was that people loved playing with the scenarios. And what the scenarios do is provide you with a pre-generated set of characters, a pre-generated set of locations, and a pre-generated set of clues, so that you can easily just pick stuff up, not having to improvise everything at the table. And when you played a vanilla game of without a scenario of the first edition, you didn't have as much of that. So we have baked that into the game, and the game now comes with a set of cards full of rich prompts to help you generate the characters that you're going to have in the game, the locations that the main character is going to explore, and the clues they're going to encounter. So it's that much easier at the table for you to just kind of go, oh, I'm drawing a blank on a clue right now, but hang on a minute, here in my hand I have a card which says technology. Cool, yeah, I'll do some sort of weird alien computer. That's easy. And I mean, I think one of the great things about Lovecraftesque is, even if you've never GM'd before, it kind of gives you your first taste of GMing, and it makes it really easy for you because all you have to do is come up with a weird clue, and anyone can do that. And 2e makes it even easier because if you've got a card in front of you with those prompts on, it's even easier to just come up with that weird clue. So I say that is the big change at the heart of it. And supporting that is a brand new set of scenarios. There's going to be, I think, a total of 18 scenarios either in the game or available as an expansion for the game, written by diverse authors, including some luminaries from the world of horror writing, or horror game writing, I should say. And those are all on cards as well. So one of the exciting things about it, for me at least, is you can play through those scenarios. They're really great and replayable in and of themselves, but you can then take the individual components of the scenarios on the cards and like combine them with each other, with other cards from the game, to produce something really unique.
I think there's another element, sorry if I may, which is really important. But when we originally wrote this game back in 2012, 2013, we had always intended it would come with a playmat or a board, precisely because of basing it on the beats in Stealing Cthulhu, as we mentioned, where the beats of a traditional Lovecraft story get broken down in a really beautiful way. We had always imagined that we would have a playmat or a board which allowed you to keep track of where you were in the story beat timeline, so that it was even easier to make sure that you were playing in the right space for the right time, so that the story felt like it was paced really well. But when we first did this, we had written games before. We had never self-published anything. We looked at creating a game which had a board and cards, and frankly, it looked terrifying in terms of the risk. We didn't know what we were doing, so we said, we will just do it as a book. We'll get people to write sad things on index cards. Everybody's cool with that. It's much lower risk. We did it print on demand, but it wasn't the full vision. And I think that having the board in front of you, if you are a more visual person, trying to hold all those story beats in your head, having it on a board in front of you where you're really keeping track of it is just it just removes some of the grit from the play experience, I think, in a really, which just sounds like it's a really tiny thing, but to me, actually, it's a really big thing.
And in addition to that, there's sets of cards with like the structure of the game written onto them. So there's a deck which you work your way through that tells you, okay, first step, you need to create your locations. Next step, create some characters. Next step, you're going to do your first scene, and it walks you through the game. And this is not revolutionary stuff. Like games like For the Queen, for example. But again, it's about making it super duper easy, even easier than it was in first edition, for anyone to walk in, pick up the game. And I have successfully run this game with people who've never played Lovecraftesque before, and taught the game, played the game, completed the story in 90 minutes. And that's how slick it is.
It sounds like you're turning the original into some sort of story driving engine that people can modify and can do with it whatever they want. How can it be escalated? Because one of the things that is also striking me when I hear you talk about Lovecraftesque is it's not a game for very long campaigns. It's not something that you could be running a campaign for 2 or 3 years, in the Orient Express sort of way. How scalable is this engine going to be for people who want longer experiences?
So we've got a set of legacy rules in the game. And what I would say about Lovecraftesque is, again, the main character is not your character. They are probably going to die at the end of the story, or at the very least have their life thoroughly ruined. The main character is the horror. And if you look at Lovecraft's books, you don't get recurrent human characters particularly. What you get is recurrent monsters and recurrent bits of paraphernalia like the Necronomicon. And so what you are doing if you play the legacy version of Lovecraftesque is you are creating your own mythos. It's as if you are creating an anthology of short horror stories. And so that's what you can do if you want to scale it up. And the way it works in effect is after every game where you discover a new horror, you actually write that into your deck and write onto the cards a new monster that you've created, so that they can come up again the next time you play the game. So gradually over time, you will in effect have a deck of monstrosities that you've made with your friends.
I think this is a really good point to go back to an earlier question that you asked that we completely ignored, which is what game influences did we have when we were writing this? And I think for me, the games that influenced us the biggest in writing Lovecraftesque were none of the Cthulhu games. It was games like Archipelago, games like Microscope, where you are, as a group, distributing creative control of the world and collaboratively creating a shared world and a shared game world, and contributing all the details and the characters and little plot threads over here. And I very much see Lovecraftesque sitting in that kind of portion of the Venn diagram of, or the constellation of game families, if you like. I think it sits there much more naturally than it sits over with the likes of Call of Cthulhu, Trail of Cthulhu, Delta Green, Achtung Cthulhu, and that family over there.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the most natural way to play Lovecraftesque is a pickup game. I've heard people relate how they use it for when when their standard game session has been cancelled. It's a really great option because it's really easy to pick up and very quick to play. People use it for convention play. People use it as a kind of buffer in between campaigns. So it obviously it is a wonderful game in its own right, and you can, as I've described, play it in that legacy mode. But it's about having a focused experience in one session.
Okay, let's talk about the campaign and what you expect to get from that campaign, because the original campaign was successful, fair to say. What are you expecting from this second campaign? What do you want to happen?
Oh, you can't ask us that. We're British. We're expecting nothing. We're just hoping that people are kind, and you better talk about the campaign, Josh.
So what we're raising money to pay. Firstly, we believe in this game. We're confident that it's going to do well, and we have already spent lots of money on it. we've paid for art, we've paid for people to write these scenarios. So we need the money for that, and we hope that we will raise enough money to pay all of those people. If we don't, then it's us that's out of pocket. But we are raising money to print a boxed game. So we hope that we will be getting a beautiful board game-like product. So you will see a fantastic box set, and it is going to contain the board and those cards, and there will be sets of supplements with the scenarios in addition to which I'm very excited about. We will be creating a ton of extra art, which will include hidden art. So this is a very exciting thing that we've stolen. We do a lot of stealing, in case you hadn't noticed. We've stolen from the Italian edition of Lovecraftesque, which is it won awards in Italy, and very deservedly so, because it is this beautiful book. And when you pick it up, it simply looks like a plain white tome with a red elder sign on the front. And you think, okay, that looks quite striking, but there's not much to it. And then you pick up your ultraviolet torch and you shine it on that cover, and suddenly, boom, hidden art pops out at you, tentacles, skulls, horrifying stuff. And it is on every page of that book that you are flipping through and seeing splatters of blood and sigils and tentacles, and all of the illustrations have hidden bits in them. And we've stolen it, and we're doing that too. It's going to be great.
The first time Narrativa showed us what they had done, I think that our jaws just hit the floor. It was so incredible and so beautiful, and we just felt like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't even know that was possible. That's stunning.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I mean, I would have never thought about doing that kind of thing with ink. I've seen this, plasticky sort of ink that you put on some pages to make sure that it shines in places. But that sounds inspired.
Yeah.
That sounds really inspired.
I think I feel, and I know that we feel that the Italian role playing scene is just knocking everybody else out the park when it comes to the presentation of their books. It's it's not just what they did with Lovecraftesque, and it's there's lots of Italian companies that are doing just the most amazing, beautiful chef's kiss stuff with their books, and I think that if people are listening to this, if there was one thing that I would recommend you do, is just to go and look at what is going on in the Italian role playing scene, because it's so good, so very good.
I need to take a look at that because I have always, whenever I've wanted to look at beautiful RPGs, I've always looked at France because they make some just absolutely delightful role-playing games. It really is a shame that there aren't more companies licensing French games because they're just amazing. So I've never thought of the Italian. I knew that the Italian scene is very vibrant and they have an awful lot out there, but I didn't realize that they were up in their game that much.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, some of the other games I've seen, Bleak Spirit, was written by a friend of ours, is a hack of Lovecraftesque in a sort of Dark Souls mode. And I mean, the UK book is lovely, but the Italian book is just lush. It's got copper plating on the edges of the pages, and it's brilliant.
Okay, so how much are people going to have to back to get their hands on that?
Yeah, so I am still finalizing my spreadsheet, so I'm going to say some numbers, and if they turn out to be slightly out, you'll have to forgive me.
Well, let's make a disclaimer. Okay, we are recording this on the 18th of September, which is like 20 days nearly, or 22 days before the campaign starts. So there is still plenty of scope for things to change between now and then, and understandably so. So people, if what you hear here or what you see here today is not what you can see on the Kickstarter campaign, that is why. So don't be mad, be understanding. Thank you very much. Sorry, Josh, over to you.
Cool. So yeah, it's in the 35 to 40 pound mark is what I would say will be the core game. So that's going to be the boxed game with all the rules inside and a full set of cards and 6 scenarios is what we have planned. You'll be able to buy the remaining 12 scenarios as add-ons. We have plans for
there to playmat. Don't forget the playmat.
And the playmat, of course, and all of the UV art and all the rest of it. There will be a virtual playroom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to work out what the kind of done thing is in terms of this is Roll20, so it seems like some people charge the full price essentially to have the physical book, same price for the virtual room. I think we probably won't do that, but watch this space. But that's the kind of price you will expect to pay. You can also buy it electronic only, of course, and that will be significantly cheaper.
For those people who are farther away, is there going to be a POD version of the game?
Well, not initially. Okay. No, we will look at that. But the PDF version will come with files that you could use to print and play if that's what you wanted to do. But as I say, the virtual playroom ought to enable you to play online too. So that will be an option.
Okay, that's fair enough indeed. How long is the campaign going to last?
It's the 10th until the 9th, I think, however many days that would be. It's approximately 30 days.
Okay, fair enough. And when can people expect to get the book? How long is the production going to be?
Well, I always like to be really careful about making promises that I can't keep here. So again, please, wait and see what's written on the page. Yeah. But we have already got the writing done. We're already partly through layout. Almost all of the scenarios are already written and just waiting to go into layout. So we're quite a long way along the production process. We are getting this thing printed in China, and it's very probable we're going to intersect with Chinese New Year at some point in the schedule. So I am thinking kind of middle of next year. That's what I'm thinking conservatively.
Okay, that sounds like very reasonable, considering that this is a pretty large project with multiple components. I mean, you're having the box, you're having the cards, the mat, the book, the scenarios, and whatever else comes out from the, I'm going to say, 9 stretch goals that you're going to break.
I think that one of the things that we learned from Lovecraftesque, which we've tried to replicate on our other campaigns, and this probably comes from my anxiety, which I transmit liberally to Josh, is that I would never feel okay with going into a Kickstarter without as much as humanly possible that was feasible to afford beforehand being done. But particularly, I would never go in without the full game text being virtually locked down. Just because, you know, we've run several of these campaigns now, and it's so easy for them to get derailed if somebody gets sick or somebody has a family crisis, that, you know, the more we can do beforehand. And because we had a very successful campaign with Lovecraftesque, the first edition, which I should say was it. I know I'm you know, very British and very modest, but it really did completely smash our expectations. Lovecraftesque one, we really didn't expect it to do as well as it did, and we were pretty blown away by it. But that has meant that we have had some funds on hand that we could pay for writing and pay for art now, so that we're not dependent on those contingencies once the campaign has gone live.
Okay.
Yeah, and I should say as well, by the way, we currently don't have plans for stretch goals. We've kind of created the stretch goals as part of the core product. That's why there's so many scenarios. So instead of saying we'll make you wait and we'll announce them over the course of the campaign, we've got them right up front. If we do unusually well, we'll rethink that. What we always say with stretch goals, we will never make the main product wait if there's kind of new stuff. We're not going to say, oh, sorry, now you have to wait until 2026. We'll produce those stretch goals separately. So
fair enough. A question that I'm asking everyone right now, for some people it's easier than for others to answer. I think for you it's going to be very easy to answer. I think I know what you're going to say. But are you using, or are you considering using AI work in the books?
No, definitely not. And if I might, I'd like to talk about that very briefly, because I've got some really strong personal opinions about it, which is that as a game designer, nothing feels cooler than talking to a human artist, telling them your ideas, and seeing what amazing stuff they produce. And it's just not the same as feeding prompts into a machine, because the work that comes out of that human connection that I have with my artists, we have with our artists, has always produced things which were so much better than we could have imagined on our own. And part of the joy for me in doing this job is that I get to collaborate with other humans and create something together. And so for me, there is no point to doing AI, because I'm cutting out of one of the things I enjoy most about the experience of being a game designer. You know, we are here to make games, to have human connections, to sit around a gaming table, collaboratively make a story with other people. That's where the joy sits. So, and for me, AI is just completely off in its own little sphere. It doesn't touch on what I'm doing, because it's not a human that I can make a human connection with. So what's the point?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And we should have mentioned the names of our artists, by the way. We have Vincent Sammy, who's done a lot of horror illustration work, and in fact, he illustrated the UK edition of Bite Marks. He has done the front cover image, and he's going to be doing a bunch of interior stuff as well. And we have Paul Tomes, whose work we really love. He has a very sort of unique style. So you know, there's going to be a great set of brand new art for the game, and I'm really looking forward to sharing all of that.
And quite frankly, so am I. So very, very much hope that the campaign is going to be smashing it through every single roof out there. That would be absolutely fantastic. And now the impossible question, and is, because I can imagine now you are completely focused on Lovecraftesque too. Then what? What happens after that?
Yeah, so we're continuing to work on small games. One of the things that we love doing is producing little kind of zine style games. We produce one a month through our Patreon. Patreon. I don't know why I can't say Patreon. I want to say Patreon. I don't know. Anyway, so we've got tons of ideas for that, and we're continuing to produce all of those. We also have a kind of a long-term project to look at bringing that emergent mystery style to some of our GM'd games. One of the things that happened after Lovecraftesque 1E was the creation of Brindlewood Bay and Apocalypse Keys, which kind of use that same emergent mystery where even the GM doesn't know what's really going on for a GM'd game. We would like to write some stuff in that space too. We've got some ideas about how to sharpen the design approach in those areas. And I'm hoping to create something which will bring my love of the sort of cosmic horror approach to Warhammer 40k and make something in that space.
Sounds very good to me. Thank you both very, very much for being here today. I hope that we can do this again in the not too distant future, when you can tell me what the amazing experience of producing Lovecraftesque second edition has been like, and thinking, what am I going to do with these £300,000? I don't know how to spend that much money. Because that would be absolutely incredible.
We would love to. We would love to come back and do that, especially if we have earned £300,000.
If you do, I'm taking the blame.
Anyway. You were the first to say the number, so
you will.
As usual, thank you very, 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 very much for being there. It's really appreciated. I hope you become as excited about the new content coming for Lovecraftesque 2 as I have, and I hope that you will pay attention to it and have a look. Just take a peek. We got nothing to lose in here. Take a peek. You may end up with something that you absolutely adore. Again, please send us your comments. We'd love to hear from you. And until the next time, please take care.